of our student athletes, coaches, game officials, and others associated with our sports programs and campuses remain our number one priority. To that end, the Big Ten Conference announced today that if the conference is able to participate in fall sports, and then parenthetically men's and women's cross country, field hockey, football, men's and women's soccer, and women's volleyball, based on medical advice, it will move to conference-only schedules in those sports. Details for these sports will be released at a later date, while decisions on sports not listed above will continue to be evaluated. By limiting competition to other Big Ten institutions, the conference will have the greatest flexibility to adjust its own operations throughout the season and make quick decisions in real time based on the most current evolving medical advice and the fluid nature of the pandemic. The announcement went on to say, in addition, the conference announced that summer athletic activities will continue to be voluntary in all sports currently permitted to engage in such activities. Furthermore, Big Ten student athletes who choose not to participate in intercollegiate athletics at any time during the summer and or the 2020-2021 academic year due to concerns about COVID-19 will continue to have their scholarship honored by their institution and will remain in good standing with their team. The announcement concluded as we continue to focus on how to play this season in a safe and responsible way based on the best advice of medical experts. We are also prepared not to play in order to ensure the health, safety, and wellness of our student athletes should the circumstances so dictate. And with that, we welcome you in to our BTN studios. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Mike Hall. Mike, there's certainly been rumors percolating here over the last few days and some speculation that something like this might happen. And so I suppose in that sense, not shocking, certainly very logical the way that it was laid out, but it certainly is shocking in the greater context of college football when you consider the notion of a football season without any non-conference games.
Right. The history of the sport going back now 151 years, that has almost always been a staple of what we know the sport to be. And someone who has been covering it for a long time, not 151 years, mind you, but still a long time, is the widely respected reporter Pat Forty, who's good enough to join us now and talk about this. Pat, the big story, Big Ten is still planning on playing football. We don't know the amount of games yet, but it will not involve any non-conference opponents in the regular season. What was your reaction?
You know, I think it makes sense. I think we're heading this way in every conference, Mike, that, that basically we're deconstructing the season and hoping to put it back together in a way where something gets played, that I don't think there's any guarantees. There's still a very good chance we end up trying to play in the spring of 2021 or we end up not playing at all. But for now, this is a retrenchment back to the Big Ten saying, okay, let's control what we can control, which is conference teams playing each other with the same protocols, same safeguards, limited travel, and hope that we get to do that. And then if we have to strip it down further, we will. But I think that's the hope for now.
I think that's the words that stuck out to me, Pat, is control from you and flexibility from the conference statement there. Because in this time when no one really knows anything, you have to be flexible, I would think, in order to try to have some form of control on what's happening.
Well, no doubt about it. And, the funny thing is, as we know, not conference, but all football schedules tend to be put together years and years in advance. And now we're going to try to put them together on the fly, basically. We're going to move dates almost assuredly. We may move opponents. I've heard that, one of the measures that's been discussed by the Big Ten is to, in addition to the 9 conference games that are scheduled, to add one more from the other division, and so you at least have an even number of home and road games, and theoretically, everybody has an even chance to produce a record that wins a division. But there's no doubt that this is going to require an incredible amount of flexibility to make this thing work at all. There are problems everywhere. There are complications everywhere, and this is going to be a lot of flying blind going into this.
Right. We wait for specifics. The announcement did talk about specifics on scheduling have not been announced yet, but they will be at a later date. That's really interesting. In that vein, too, Pat, I wonder, too, when the schedule is made, the idea is if you keep it in conference, one of the benefits is the travel being minimized, too. I wonder if when you have, say, a cross-divisional game, if there's a specific effort to try to not have a Minnesota play a Rutgers and try to keep the travel, even within the conference, as small as possible.
Sure, I think that'll be a consideration they'll look at. And I actually spoke with Kevin Warren. He said that in the next week they'll really be digging into scheduling. But that's one of the things you run into with conferences that are as vast as this, where you're Lincoln, Nebraska to the west, you're Piscataway, New Jersey to the east. Conference games there's still a lot of travel if you're trying to go Rutgers to Nebraska or vice versa. So there may be a look and just say, what are the 10 closest opponents, for each team, and then you can see what you can figure out and patch together there. There's going to have to, I think, be just a lot of very creative thinking going into how to make this thing work and how to make it safe for everyone. And again, that's if we do end up playing. It's still TBD whether there is a fall season.
Well, that's my next question for you. According to some reports, Ohio State's athletic director Gene Smith has said he's no longer feeling cautiously optimistic about playing this season in terms of having a full season. He says instead he's still very concerned. You talk to a lot of people from a lot of different positions in a lot of different conferences around this sport. Where are you right now?
Oh, very concerned, very pessimistic, I guess you would say. That's the thing is I think as we've gotten closer to this, everybody was hoping June 1st that the outlook was going to continue to improve throughout June. It went the other way into July. It's going the other way. Virus cases being up, hospitals filling back up, all of these sorts of things that just kind of, I think, has gotten everybody back into a shell and wondering, how do we salvage this? Because when you look at the logistical challenge, there's nothing as challenging as college football. It's played on a campus where there are going to be tens of thousands of students back in an environment. The football itself is a difficult sport to manage from a health and safety standpoint amidst a pandemic. You put another 20,000 people theoretically into a stadium, and that may all go by the wayside. We may be playing in front of nobody. So the logistical challenges, I just think it's going to be really tough to play at all in the fall. It may even be tough to play in the spring. This is going to be the hardest sport to figure out, I think, of any sport in America.
Right, and the release from the Big Ten today even says, quote, if college football can be played this fall. We're in early mid-July now. What do you think, Pat, is the next step for us figuring out if college football can be played this fall?
Well, I think we're going to see other conferences that are going to do similar things to what the Big Ten just did today, and go to conference-only games. I think there are some, I've heard that the SEC, their athletic directors pushing for a spring sport there. Now, from a weather standpoint, they should probably be able to do that more easily than the rest of them. So I think in the next couple of weeks, you're probably going to see people getting in line with the Big Ten, and then you're going to monitor just basically if players are starting to really get into full team activities in mid-July, how does the 2 weeks go after that? And then August 1st, as the date I've heard thrown around a lot, as kind of a Fisher cut bait date. And so, I think then we're looking, can we play at all in 2020? And I think that decision will be made by August 1st.
What are your thoughts, Pat, on if the season were to be pushed back to 2021, as into play in the spring?
If it's a spring sport, boy, it's better than no football, but just think of the complications here. You are going to have just this unbelievable facility glut, basically, support staff glut, because you're going to be trying to play winter sports. You're going to be trying to play spring sports. Everything will be played in a 4-month span or so on a campus. Could it be done? Yes. Could it be really difficult? Yes. Could it further engender some hard feelings where football gets its way with everything and other sports are asked to move aside when it comes to facilities, when it comes to training staff, when it comes to medical staff, all those things, training table? Yeah, all those things could happen. And then broadcasting. How do you guys figure out what games are on when you're already scheduled to show basketball games, when you're scheduled to show wrestling matches, swimming meets, that sort of thing? So the complications are immense to playing a spring schedule, but I think everyone is willing to try to at least give that a shot if that's the last resort.
Right, and that may be it. Like we said at the beginning, flexibility seems to be the important thing at this point right now. Pat Forty, as always, thanks for the insight. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
Reaction from throughout the league to today's announcement. Here's what Iowa Athletic Director Gary Barta had to say, quote, "We fully support the actions being taken by the Big Ten Conference, knowing that the health, safety, and wellness of our student athletes, coaches, and staff is the top priority. The past few months have entailed numerous conversations between my conference colleagues, Commissioner Warren, and our Big Ten presidents as we have worked to navigate the challenges associated with this pandemic. The uncertainties have been difficult on our student athletes and coaches, and I appreciate their continued understanding of the situation. I'm grateful for our fans who are also waiting for direction. While many uncertainties still exist, today's decision will provide the greatest amount of flexibility as we move forward. BTN's Howard Griffith kind enough to spend some time with us now. And Howard, we talk first about those uncertainties. What was your reaction? We've been in this kind of limbo here now for the last month or so, waiting some sort of guidance as to what was going to happen. What was your reaction when you got this news today?
Well, Dave, this is kind of what I thought was ultimately going to be able to or be forced to happen as far as conferences are concerned, because I thought conferences were going to have to be able to lay down the guidelines, particularly when it comes to testing, that it has to be universal across the board. And I thought really the only way to do that was be able to have the conferences be able to do that from their level. It's a difficult situation, but to me, that's what they're doing to make sure that they're taking care of the student athlete. And as you go, if you read the release again, it's clearly that that's where they want to do, make sure that they're protecting the student athlete.
It was interesting, Gary Barta used that word uncertainty a couple of different times in what was a brief statement. I do think that's kind of been the key phrase because it has been so uncertain. And you mentioned it, Howard. I mean, this announcement really is focused quite a bit on the student athletes, on their concerns, this notion that if student athletes don't want to play, they will retain their scholarship and will remain in good standing on whatever sport it is that they participate in. You are the father of a college football player. Your son, Houston, plays at Notre Dame. I know I don't want to ask you to paint with a broad brush, but kind of what are the concerns that you're hearing from the student-athlete point of view?
Well, for me, and the student-athlete, to me, it's about testing universally, right? There are going to be non-conference games, or the teams that they're going to be playing and competing against going to have the same strict regimented testing guidelines that, say, Notre Dame is going to have. That was a concern. What's going to happen as far as traveling is concerned? What happens if a player were to test positive while they were traveling? There's so many things, Dave, so many layers to this from a parent standpoint that really have still not been addressed. But I think we have to continue to wait. And the toughest thing, I think, for everyone is no one's in control but the COVID-19. That's the only thing or object or whatever you would like to refer to it as that's in control. We don't know. And that's when I think you hear ADs, you hear presidents talk about trying to be flexible, to be able to be nimble, to be able to make changes when they need to be able to do that. That's going to be the most important part of this as far as being able to move a season forward. And again, Dave, this is part of when you have a conference-only schedule. This is significant because you are assured that your conference partners are going to be following the same guidelines that your other institutions are following inside that conference.
You mentioned testing as being a huge concern. I think there's no doubt that anyone, certainly if I were in your position as a parent, if I were a player, that would be one of the biggest things I'd want to know is how are these cases being documented? As you mentioned, how does what we're doing compare with what our opponents are doing? What are the other questions that have been going through your mind from the point of view of a parent, from talking to your student athlete as well?
Well, just the uncertainty of it, I think, is a big part of it. What's going to happen when the normal student population comes back to campus, if we can get to that point? There's so many concerns, Dave. And again, it's travel. What happens? What happens if somebody comes down with it? As we've seen across the country, we've seen players who have contracted and been forced into isolation, been put into isolation, I should say, not forced. But what is the mental state of that student athlete at that particular point that has to be put over into a separate area for what is 14 days of a quarantine period? So these are all significant that I think that the parents have to look at when they start to look at what's going to happen as far as this upcoming season is concerned with fall sports. And I think, honestly, Dave, I think that you're going to see over the next several weeks you're going to see more parents involved. You're going to see more parents exercise extreme caution to their kids. And there's going to be some situations where people are truly going to decide to sit out this season. And for good reason, because there's too many uncertainties out there. You even talk about going out and competing and also coming down or diagnosed with COVID. What are going to be the long-term ramifications to that? To me, these are all significant questions that we really can't answer. And there's no way to answer because this is so new for us. So when you couple it with everything that's going on, I think it's just important that the conferences that they really support what the student athletes are going to be going through. And we've seen that through the conference statement today. And I think we'll continue to see that moving forward with other conferences as well.
And I think we've certainly seen it from the Big Ten. New Commissioner Kevin Warren has talked a lot about mental health, has had some major initiatives already on that front. So it's no doubt that this is an issue that's kind of front and center in his mind to begin with. And this has turned into, as you say, Howard, it's not just a physical issue, it is a mental health issue for student athletes as well. And yet I know that there are many student athletes who are really enthusiastic about playing and want to get out there and want to have the closest they can have to some sense of normalcy. In your mind, where does it have to be? What's kind of the threshold from your point of view? Let's say you were back in those shoes, or from Houston's point of view of saying, okay, look, I understand that there are risks inherent in everything we do, but I'm comfortable with them. Where would it need to be in your mind?
Honestly, Dave, I think the most difficult part of that question is young people want to go out and do exactly what they've been either trained to do or what they're accustomed to doing. So in the case of athletes, they want to be back around their teammates. They want to be around their coaches. They want to be in situations where they can be competitive and they feel comfortable. Being at home with their parents is, yeah, sure, they're comfortable with that, but that's not what's going to make them happy. What's going to make them happy is being on campus and having the opportunity to compete. Now, that's where the parent, that's where the adult have to make very difficult really decisions for our young people, because that's what it comes down to. Listen, they want to go out and do everything that they can to play, but I think it's the responsibility of the adults to make sure that those young people are put in a position to be successful and to be healthy. And that's difficult. Those two don't always mesh, Dave. As you know, you have daughters, and sometimes the advice that you give is not taken the way we would like it to be taken. But at the end of the day, you're a parent, you're a dad, and you have a better idea of what's best for your child. And I think having a commissioner that has a son that's playing down in Mississippi State, had a daughter that played competitive volleyball, he gets that, he feels that. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to the parents being able to have tough conversations with their young people about where the next steps are going to go.
Well, Howard, I can say safely that I give a lot of advice that isn't taken in my household. But again, that's
all right. That's all right. That's the way it goes.
Exactly. Right? That's more my issue here than something we need to discuss more broadly. Howard Griffith, always appreciate your insights. I greatly look forward to the time when you and I will be able to have this conversation in person. Thank you, my friend.
I know. Miss you. Tell the family I said hello.
Likewise. Howard Griffith.
Much more on our special coverage here on BTN, as the Big Ten fall sports this year will be conference only. We expect to hear from the commissioner, Kevin Warren, as well as former Buckeye head coach Urban Meyer. That's next.
Buckeyes win their third consecutive Big Ten championship and fourth in the last 6 seasons. It's their 38th Big Ten title overall, 34-21. Ohio State defeats Wisconsin.
At the celebration of the Big Ten championship game back in December, Ohio State hoping to defend that title. There will be no non-conference games this year. That's the announcement today. Here's what Athletic Director Gene Smith had to say about football in general this fall. Quote, "I'm really concerned when you look at the behavior of our country, and in May we were on a downward trajectory. Now if we are not the worst in the world, one of the worst in the world."
One of the best in the world at playing defense was James Laurinaitis when he did for Ohio State. He's good enough to join us now, a BTN analyst as well. James, you heard this news. The Big Ten is planning on going forward to play football games this year, but in conference only, no non-conference games. How'd you react?
Kind of expected, Mike. I think it's something that, it's amazing where we've been with this. Back in April, maybe you were thinking, gosh, I hope we have football at all. And then you kind of got more confident as you got to May and you started getting optimistic. I remember when Gene Smith was saying, maybe we'll have 25,000 fans in the shoe. And at that point, you were optimistic that maybe that was being conservative. And you thought maybe there'd be more as the fall got here. However, because of whatever reason, we were always worried about the second outbreak in flu season. And it seems like this second outbreak is here. And everyone's being forced to make really tough decisions, not just college football, but when you talk about the NHL is trying to get back going, the NBA, MLS, all these leagues are trying to restart. And it's such unknown territory right now that it's difficult for everybody.
You're not that far removed from being a player yourself. So put the helmet back on, theoretically, here for me. What would you be most concerned about if you were a player and were about to try to play football in a handful of weeks?
Well, Mike, to be honest, I was a meatball. So I tried to remember back to 2009 when the swine flu happened. And to be honest, I have no recollection of any worry at all or even thinking anything about some kind of flu strain going around the world. It didn't really occur to me. I just figured, how could we go play football? So if I'm going to be completely honest, when I would be back in college, I was so obsessed with just the game and studying, I'd probably just do whatever the coaches told you to do. And at this point, the unique thing that's way different now, obviously, than back then is that this is something that humans haven't seen before. It's why it's the novel coronavirus. So this is something that's different. But in my mentality, I would just want to know, quite frankly, I probably would have been a little arrogant and thinking, well, I'm young, I'll be able to get through it. And I'm glad that there are others like the commissioner of the Big Ten and all the health people that are involved in the Big Ten in these decisions to help these students realize just how important their health is and how basically dangerous it would be to resume sports. And I think, right now I'm really nervous about the fall and having a football season, even if that means conference only, and even if that means no fans.
Well, I don't expect you to speak for everyone, but give me an idea of how many players nowadays you think have that exact same attitude that you would have had 10 years ago of, I'm really not going to focus on that. I'm young and healthy. I just want to play.
Like you said, it's hard to know what these young guys are thinking now, but I would assume a lot of them, probably over half, are thinking, let's just go play. And I think you're seeing it throughout society, right? Some people have such concerns about work, some concerns about where am I going to get my next paycheck, where they're not even worried about some coronavirus going around. They're trying to feed their families. So they're trying to push forward and do those things. I think college football players are the same way. Some are just saying, look, I'm just trying to play football, get through this season and continue to kind of chase my dream of maybe playing in the NFL or graduating or whatever. I would assume over half are thinking, let's just go play. The unique thing is that, when Ohio State shut down their voluntary workouts, they're not releasing the COVID numbers, but you wonder, I wonder, what are they? And they're not releasing anything. You can try to make a few phone calls in the program. They won't share anything, but you start to wonder, what is the right way to go about this? You saw the numbers at Clemson, and when, you're hosting your local radio show, you'll hear people say, well, good that they get it now and kind of get that, herd immunity. And I'm like, well, is it? We don't know. We don't know whether you can get it twice. You hear misleading information on both sides that you can't get it twice. You can get it twice. the World Health Organization says, hey, you can't spread it if you're asymptomatic. And then they come back, well, we don't know if that's true. There's so much information that people are just trying to spew out that I think everyone's trying to figure out one little straw to hang on to. And it seems like anytime you get some good news, then you get some more bad. And it's been really frustrating to try to figure out how we're going to push forward this fall.
James, let me do one more with you. Overall, how confident are you we'll be playing games this fall?
Well, I mean, if we play, there'll be no fans. And it just dawned on me last night, Mike, as I was sitting in bed, I was thinking about it. And I said, you play with the energy that you play with on the field because of the fans. Those third downs and you're in the shoe and you get a crowd going wild and they're rocking the bell. Like you are honestly ready to go because of the fans. And it just dawned on me how much it'd be difficult to play without fans. And I understand where we are. Like, you got to take what you can get. As a fan, we can selfishly say, let's play. Go ahead and go out there and play football. But if you're a Justin Fields or you're a Trey Sermon who transfers over from Oklahoma, you're thinking, I get to play in Ohio Stadium in front of 105,000 people to then have that completely wiped out and empty and be a ghost town in there. And just, it'd be so hard to manufacture the same energy that you would have with fans in the stands. And I know where we're at. Beggars can't be choosers and all that, but I just feel bad for those kids. And then, I mean, as you think about it, it trickles down just the high school students and the ones that didn't have their springs and summers, and now some might not have a fall or winter. It just breaks your heart because those are some of the best memories you have, high school and then college and the fans and everything, just celebrating when you have a win. And nothing's going to be the same, at least for this season.
Right. As fans, we just think we'd like the games. As broadcasters, we go, well, the games, but without a crowd, maybe it'd be different. But that's a good point about how different the experience would be for players when that's what they've looked up to their whole life to experience, and they can't do that. James Laurinaitis, as always, we appreciate you joining us, man.
Yep, good to be with you.
Here's the reaction from Penn State Athletic Director Sandy Barber saying, quote, throughout the last 4 months, Penn State has operated from the premise that the health and safety of our students and all those in our care as the top priority. These decisions made by the Big Ten and fully supported by Penn State University have all been made with the thought of maximizing control and flexibility in order to protect health and safety of our student athletes, staffs, coaches, and those involved in supporting our games. Barber went on to say many details remain to be determined in order to be able to operationalize and move forward with intercollegiate athletic competition beginning in mid to late August. We will begin immediately working with the Big Ten Conference and our fellow Big Ten institutions on the details that will allow us to provide the safest and most healthy environment for our student athletes, coaches, staff, and community. Again, the breaking news here today is that the Big Ten will not play any non-conference games in the fall, not just in football, but in the other fall sports as well. Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic was the first to report this story. She joins us now. Nicole, to the best of your knowledge in reporting this story, what was the process of the Big Ten getting to this point?
Well, I think that these were conversations that have been happening over the last week. I mean, I think everyone in college athletics understands that in the last 2 weeks, everything has shifted as there have been outbreaks in so many college football hotbeds. There have been the need to shut down voluntary workouts on a number of campuses, including Ohio State. And so these are conversations that have been happening within the Big Ten and the Pac-12 for some time. And honestly, this is something that people have wondered about since the beginning of the pandemic, whether or not leagues would just go to conference only. And I will say over the last month, a lot of Power 5 athletic directors, some in this league and some elsewhere, have brought up the fact that, the testing disparities across the board were going to be challenging for college football because you don't want to put your athletes mixing with the population that is doing different things from a testing and safety and protocol standpoint. So that was definitely part of it. And then obviously there have been restrictions on travel. You've seen a number of states implement those 14-day quarantine periods when you come back from traveling to an at-risk state. So there are a lot of factors there that go into non-conference scheduling in a normal year. And this year, I think, when you see in these statements, you see the emphasis on the flexibility of being able to move and kind of taking out some of those variables of those non-conference opponents. That was something that was attractive to athletic directors in this league.
Nicole, what's your sense in terms of the number of games? Were you able to kind of unearth any of that? The Big Ten typically plays 9 conference games. Would we expect potentially more?
Yeah, I think the expectation is that it would be 10. And, again, it's kind of a round number. Again, when you have less than what was previously scheduled, which is, a 12-game regular season, it does potentially allow for some flexibility to push back a little bit. And again, when you have less variables and less outside schools, that flexibility is a lot easier, because right now we saw with the Ivy League and what we saw with the ACC earlier today with their fall sports that aren't football is everyone's trying to buy themselves a little bit of time, right? To get more of a grasp, to let these outbreaks diminish, to get things under control, to see how football practices are going to work and what the impact might be on positive test results as more and more team activities are allowed, right? So if you go to less than a 12-game season, you do have some flexibility in that sense, because you could possibly push back your final decisions about a fall season if it comes to that.
Nicole, it's interesting. Obviously, we're the Big Ten Network. We focus on what goes on in the Big Ten. That's what we do. Those are our marching orders here, and that's what we're primarily concerned with. But non-conference scheduling has such a profound impact throughout college football. I mean, there really is a domino effect here. You think about a league like the MAC. There are 11 games scheduled between the MAC and the Big Ten, with 9 different schools being impacted. So a couple had multiple games. 36 schools in all had games scheduled against the Big Ten. Now they know they will not have those games. What are the broader impacts throughout college football of decisions like the one that the Big Ten made today and like other leagues are considering?
Yeah, and it's huge. And from an FCS standpoint and Group of 5 standpoint, there are a lot of programs that rely on the money that they get from games like this, buy games, guarantee games, as we call them, to really prop up their entire athletic departments. And so I think you are going to see mixed reactions from athletic directors and officials in those leagues who, are probably a little bit glad. There will be some people who are glad there's some clarity, right? And the ability to move forward now. And then you also have people who are very upset about not having these games and that the Big Ten is protecting itself and not helping these athletic departments really exist and sponsor other sports. And so I think that it's very possible that we will see ripple effects from decisions like this. And, sources tell me that the Pac-12 has also been discussing a similar conference-only model. That the ripple effects are for those FCS opponents, the leagues that they're in. If they don't have bye games, is it worth trying to put on a football season in the fall? And you could see those same questions come to some of the Group of 5 members as well, because again, these game contracts, the money that they are normally worth, what they are getting to come and play a game like at the Big House or the Shoe, that's real money to these athletic departments that props up their ability to offer other sports. So there are definitely ramifications for all of this. I don't think the Big Ten is going to be the only conference to do this. So this is just going to continue to impact more and more conferences and individual schools throughout college football.
Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic. Great work breaking this story today, Nicole, and thanks so much for taking a few minutes to join us.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Now, because the non-conference football games have been canceled, that means there are these matchups that we're all looking forward to that will not be happening. Michigan at Washington, Ohio State going out west to play the Ducks, Penn State and Virginia Tech, we're also going to play that day. Same time as Iowa and Iowa State. We're going to continue their annual rivalry. The Spartans were going to bring in the Hurricanes for a big game, and Lambeau Field was going to host Wisconsin and Notre Dame. None of these games will be happening anymore. This all happened because Commissioner Kevin Warren made the announcement. He's good enough to join us now to talk about this. Commissioner, we talked a couple weeks ago. There were other things on our mind that were bigger in terms of importance than this right now. But now we're here on this schedule. Let me ask you, why today as opposed to 1 week from now or a week ago? Why make the announcement now?
I mean, when you reach a decision, it's important to make an announcement. And we just felt that from a collaborative basis, being in communication on a regular basis with our chancellors, our presidents, our athletic directors, our head football coaches, that the time had come for us to make an announcement. I mean, this allows us to be able to just take another step in this entire process. I mean, this is a complicated time, complicated world that we're living in with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what we're doing is relying on the expert advice of our medical advisors. You know, we have our Big Ten Emerging Infectious Disease Committee and also all of our other Big Ten doctors and trainers. And so we made a vow early on that first and foremost, we would put the health, the safety, and the wellness of our student athletes at the center of all of our decisions. So we felt that this was an appropriate time to make this announcement.
Well, and it seems in that specific regard, Commissioner, that if you control the games, you control whom everyone is playing, and that means you can have uniform testing, it would seem, for everyone, not only you're playing, but everyone on your team as well. How important was that in this decision?
Well, when you make these decisions, you just have to look at all of the issues. And one of the things that was most important to us was the flexibility of scheduling all the operations. You know, it's much easier if we're just working with our Big Ten institutions from a scheduling standpoint, from a traveling standpoint, you know, all of those issues that go into having our student athletes compete. And because otherwise, when you start working outside your conference, you put yourself in a position where there are enough issues that we're dealing with already, but then you add on top of it the issues of travel and just the logistics associated with it. And so we felt that at the end of the day, this decision would allow us to, one, do the right thing by our student athletes, keep them at the forefront of all of our decisions, and make sure we create an environment to give us the best chance to play. I mean, one thing we have to realize that this is not a fait accompli that we're going to have sports in the fall. We may not have sports in the fall. We may not have a college football season in the Big Ten. And so we just wanted to make sure that this was a next logical step to always rely on our medical experts to keep our student athletes at the center of all of our decisions and make sure that they are as healthy as they possibly can be from a mental, a physical, and emotional health and wellness standpoint.
You know, we mentioned flexibility a few times. That not only works in testing, but I suppose, Commissioner, also works in, you know, considering we don't know what the future would be, if a game had to be canceled or postponed a couple weeks in, you now have the flexibility to do that because it's a completely conference-only year, correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, and that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we had the flexibility. I mean, we're dealing with this pandemic, not understanding how COVID-19 is moving in our society. Some days are better than the other. And we just felt by making sure that we kept our scheduling, our games, our competition in the Big Ten family, it would allow us the flexibility to get us in a better position to possibly play. And that's where we want to be with. The other thing that was important today about the announcement is that, one, all of our summer activities, we've made it very clear now that they will remain voluntary because, again, looking out for our student athletes. And then the other big thing is that any of our Big Ten student athletes who decide not to participate in student athletics this year based upon COVID-19, that we're honoring their scholarship 100%. So their status on the team will not be impacted at all in a negative manner, that they have that flexibility. And we just want to make sure that we do everything we possibly can and allow our medical experts for us to give us advice that we can listen to, that we can evaluate, and always do the right thing for the health, safety, and wellness of our student athletes. I mean, so today's an interesting day, to say the least. It's a lot of hours that goes into these decisions, but I am very comfortable that on behalf of our chancellors, our presidents, our football coaches, all of our coaches, our student athletes, and our conference administrators, and also our athletic directors, that we did the right thing. And I always ask myself, what's the wise thing to do? And as we sit here today, the wise thing to do was for us to not only create, but announce a Big Ten conference-only schedule.
And if the health, safety, and wellness of the players are in line, that sports can happen this fall, there's going to have to be a schedule, and it's going to have to be new. When do you plan on announcing how many games will be played and who will be playing who, where, when, et cetera?
Yeah, quite naturally. I mean, this is really where the work begins, to make sure that we get testing protocols finalized, to make sure we get all of our medical and operational procedures finalized, but then also start working with our network partners. And then, like you just alluded to, is from a scheduling standpoint, to start working on various scenarios that will work. So over the next week or so, we'll work through all of the scheduling issues that we'll have to deal with to make sure that we're always doing the best that we possibly can to keep our student athletes healthy and safe. And but also provide some great Big Ten football, hopefully in the fall, to our fans. And I know this has been a very, very interesting last 4 months, to say the least, on many levels. And so it's just, again, in my position, it truly is an honor and a pleasure to have partners like the Big Ten Network, but also to serve a great group of chancellors and presidents and work side by side and work with, our wonderful head coaches and our athletic directors. And on my mind every day is, as a parent who has a son who's a student athlete, a football student athlete in college now, that I'm always thinking about, what would I want to do for my son or my daughter or my grandson or my granddaughter. And I just want to make sure that every decision we make honors that commitment that we've made to our student athletes, that allows them to be students first and athletes second, and provide an environment to them that is safe and also healthy. And so we felt like we had to make this decision. We made the decision. We're comfortable with our decision. And again, we're taking this pandemic on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure there'll be many more decisions that we'll have to make over the next days, weeks, and months ahead.
Commissioner, I can't imagine the amount of Zoom calls you've been on in the last few months, and with the variety of people you've had to talk to. But specifically, I'm curious what your conversations have been, especially with regards to this topic about only playing conference games, with other commissioners of other conferences.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say that I have always had throughout my career is to, one, make sure I over-communicate, and two, that I'm always transparent. So internally, on a regular basis, we have conversations on a daily basis with our athletic directors, a weekly basis with many of our head coaches, especially our football coaches. And then our other A5 commissioners, we also have daily conversations. And then I'm in regular contact with all of our chancellors and presidents. We have meetings on the calendar. And not only aside of that, just communicating with them on a regular basis. So, one, to be transparent, two, to be always over communicate. And so a lot of these conversations that, we've been talking about this for the last month. When you sit in a seat like this, you always have to make sure that you are always preparing for the what if scenarios, and many of which may never come to fruition. They may just end up in a binder or in a desk drawer or saved on a computer somewhere. But one good thing about, working in the Big Ten, we have incredibly bright people who are astute, who understand this conference, and we have a long history of doing the best that we can to do what's right. And so we've been looking at various scenarios. We'll continually look on a daily basis as far as what affords us an opportunity to do the right thing by our student athletes. So, yeah, there's been a lot of communication. You're right. There have been many, many, many hours of Zoom calls and just trying to communicate. This is what even makes this more difficult, is the fact that we're having to do it in an environment. If we were in our office together and could walk down the hallway and huddle up and talk about these different things, you think about it. We have our staff is spread around the country, and we have 14 incredible institutions spread over 11 states. That goes from Nebraska to New Jersey. And also this is a time in the summer that many people that we're dealing with are on family vacation. So we have all of those different issues that we're dealing with. But by and large, one thing about, the human race is that they have great hearts. We have great people in the Big Ten Conference. We're striving to always do the best that we possibly can to make the most wise decision. And this was a decision that we collectively had to come together on to say what really is the wise thing to do. And we felt that today was the day for us to announce it. Now we can move forward and try to start putting all these other pieces in place, from a scheduling standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a testing protocol standpoint, and all the other issues, all the different things that we'll have to deal with our network partners, and also just working through with the return to campus, and just making sure that our student athletes stay as healthy and as safe as they possibly can, but also afford them an opportunity, if we're so blessed, to be able to play fall sports in the Big Ten.
Well, here's hoping that the next time we are able to chat, Commissioner, it is with good news and that the steps that are needed to be made have officially happened. Commissioner Kevin Warner, the Big Ten, thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, I appreciate your support the way that you all work and report the news and handle yourselves. And so it's one of those times in society that I'm sure we'll look back and hopefully one day I have grandkids that will ask me, hey, what was that like? That was an interesting year. And so we'll keep doing the right thing. We'll keep putting our student athletes at the first and top of our list. And we'll always make sure that we look out for them and make sure that they are healthy and safe. So thank you for everything you do. I hope you're safe. I hope your family is safe. And I look forward to when we talk again. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Kevin Warren. Dave?
Yeah, thank you.
We showed you this earlier. Want to bring it back now. This was what Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith had to say about football this fall. Quote, I'm really concerned when you look at the behavior of our country. And in May, we were on a downward trajectory. Now, if we are not the worst in the world, one of the worst in the world, of course, alluding to how the country has been impacted by COVID-19. Gene Smith, the fine athletic director at Ohio State, kind enough to join us on the phone. And Gene, before I get into asking you some of the things that are on my mind, I'm interested in what's on your mind, and specifically that statement today. You did not have a particularly optimistic tone there when you were speaking to the media. I guess I would just ask you to start by elaborating on those thoughts.
Well, Dave, I appreciate the opportunity to be on, and you know me, I'm a pretty optimistic guy, and I just feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to, be a part of this process. We've been led by a great commissioner. He's helping us in a great way. But as we entered this pandemic, I'm looking at it from a couple views, one in Ohio and two nationally. I felt that our governor in our state did an excellent job, and we were on a downward trajectory with the growth of the virus. And as we went through May, I was feeling optimistic that things were being managed. And then June hit, and we began to loosen up some of the opportunities. And now we have a spike again. And just look at the numbers. I'm in Franklin County in Columbus, Ohio, and we're one of the worst in the state. And you look at other states across the country, and they're similar. So our people haven't responded to the recommended protocols that our medical experts are recommending to us to put in place in order to manage the pandemic. And so I'm concerned. I just don't know if we'll be able to compete this fall. But I really like the position we put ourselves in with the conference-only schedule. But I am concerned.
What are the advantages that you see from the conference-only schedule, Gene?
Well, I think opening up September was huge for us, and having a chance to move conference games into September, having a chance to have the control from a conference point of view to be able to manage disruptions. We don't know what's ahead of us. You could have a contest that needs to be canceled because a particular environment has a spike, then we can adjust. And, when you're playing non-conference games, that's difficult to do. So it opened up the opportunity for us to play in September. It opened up the opportunity to possibly have a conference champion. And I know everyone wants to talk about the CFP and bowl games and things of that nature, and that's important. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure we put the conference championship on a pedestal like it used to be years ago, and try and make sure that we provide that opportunity for our student athletes.
It is amazing we spend all the time in a normal year debating, right, the college football playoff and who's in and who deserves to be in and how many teams should be in. And now this year, as you say, we'd just be happy to have a season at all. You did have some news yesterday coming out of Columbus, the shutting down of the voluntary workouts due to COVID concerns within the Ohio State Athletic Department. What will it take for you to feel comfortable allowing that to resume?
Yeah, we've been very conservative in our approach from the beginning of time when we started back in June, just slowly cascading teams back in, and we have about 198 student athletes back, and so we wanted to make sure that whenever we had an issue that we paused, which is what we've done, and we'll follow the lead of our medical experts like we've always done throughout this process, and they'll give us guidance as we move into next week to help us determine when we might lift the pause button. But it's hard to predict at this point in time, so we'll lean on our medical experts.
Gene, I'm interested. You spent all this time around the student athletes. You mentioned nearly 200 there back on campus who had been working out in Columbus. And the Big Ten today said, hey, if you do not want to play, you will retain your scholarship. You'll be in good standing on the team. So in other words, were the schedule to be played and a player said, hey, I don't feel comfortable, then that certainly doesn't harm them in any way, whether it be academically, financially, or otherwise. What has been the tenor, though, of what you have heard from student athletes? I know you're talking about nearly 200 people. It's hard to say it's been exactly this, but kind of broadly, what are you hearing from Buckeye student athletes?
Well, they want to play. We're fortunate. We have some student athletes who, in every sport, who see opportunities for themselves to compete in their sport after their collegiate experience, and they want that opportunity to compete and have that chance to go on to the next level, be that professional or ultimately represent our country in Olympic sports. So all of our athletes want to compete. They want to play. They couldn't wait to get back here, frankly, when we were holding them off, because we have to keep in mind we've created a culture in athletics where our student athletes are typically here all summer long. And then in March, we tell them to go home, and they're at home all summer long. I think we had an environment where maybe even the parents wanted them out of the house. But the reality is they wanted to come back and work out. In our environments, our facilities are safer than some places that they were at. So they want to play. I can't tell you how much they want to play, and I'm just hopefully we get an opportunity where they can play.
Gene, what have the discussions been with some of these non-conference opponents? I mean, you had the high-profile game against Oregon this year, a couple other non-conference games as well. We know that some of those games involve payouts to the opponents. How are you going to handle that?
Yeah, it's really hard. That's one of the toughest calls I had to make. And, I talked to all three of my colleagues in our non-conference opponents, and they were great because they were all having the same discussions in their league. So they all agree that we can talk down the road and try and talk about rescheduling. And of course, with Oregon, it's a little different scenario because we have a home-and-home series, and Rob's a good friend. We served on the CFP together, and so we're going to try and see if we can reschedule it and create that environment again. We'll do Buffalo and Bowling Green, see if we can try and reschedule it.
Last question for you, and then I'll let you go. Thanks so much for your time here, Gene. I guess I'm just curious what this would have to look like for you to feel comfortable playing this year.
Well, first and foremost, I have to have feedback from our players that they feel comfortable, our coaches that they feel comfortable. The medical experts are the ones that are helping guide us on what type of protocols we have to have in place. How many times we're going to have to test, and what type of breaks we have to create. All those type of things. I have to see the behaviors of our athletes because we have them in our environment and they're controlled in our environment, but ultimately they have to go home. They have to go to their apartments and making sure that they are demonstrating physical distancing, wearing their mask, all those type of things. So, there's a number of different things that I have to see, but one of them, the first and foremost, is a comfort level with our athletes and their parents, that whatever our medical experts say, this is how we're going to do it, and we don't have that yet. Once we get to that point, then we might reach a comfort level, and I can't reiterate enough the fact that we might not play. We just might not, and I think that people need to understand that.
Gene, there is one more thing, actually, that I want to ask you before I let you go. We had the big news yesterday with Stanford announcing 11 sports were being dropped. They have a massive athletic department. Their athletic department and yours are the two biggest in the country. How concerned are you in terms of what this might mean in terms of a trickle-down effect within your department?
Yeah, hopefully we won't get there. I've had to do that before, and I feel for my good friend Bernard Muir at Stanford, and standing in front of those athletes and those coaches, and I've been there, had to do that before at Eastern Michigan, and it's a painful experience. And I'm all about opportunities. I just believe that we provide so much through our participation and competitive experience for young people. So. We'll just have to see how things go this year, and we'll make decisions in the future.
Gene Smith, Ohio State Athletic Director. Thanks again, Gene. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care now.
You too.
So let's look at the timeline for the Big Ten and this COVID-19 global pandemic. Back on March 12th, the men's basketball tournaments and all others were canceled for the rest of the academic year. The day after, organized team activities were suspended for a few weeks. In late April, a formal announcement of a task force for emerging infectious diseases was announced by the conference. Then in early May, a suspension of all organized team activities went until June 1st. Later in June, schools began their return of student athletes on campus for workouts that were voluntary. In early July, the Big Ten announced the conference-only competition for fall sports. That was, of course, earlier today. That is why we are on air right now. Bruce Feldman, widely respected reporter, is good enough to join us now. Bruce, one of the things we've been talking about is the importance for the Big Ten now of the way and the frequency that they test people can now be uniform, because everyone that every Big Ten team is playing is going to be under the same rules. Is it safe to assume other conferences are going to see that and say that makes sense to us too?
Yeah, if they can deal with it. I mean, you're talking about financial implications, especially when you're talking about non-conference games. There were a lot of schools that just couldn't simply afford it. And so I think that created some really challenges with consistency and protocols and things of that nature. And I think that's one thing that probably the Big Ten will be able to get out in front of a little bit, is now to have more of an established structure in place, and some of the other issues where, hey, we're paying this team X amount of dollars for this non-conference game. Are their testing protocols the same? Should they be using some of the money that we're spending, that they're making off this game on that? Is that in their budget? Those are the things that I think behind the scenes are a lot of things that people were concerned about in leadership.
We just had Ohio State's athletic director, Gene Smith, on. He talked about how he is indeed very concerned that there will even be a season. From the coaches and ADs that you've talked to nationally, how much is that sort of what most people are thinking right now?
It's escalated a lot in the last week and a half, Mike. There was a call I had with another conference Power 5 AD on Sunday, and he said that he had a call with the rest of the ADs in his conference last Tuesday, and he said he got off that phone call very, very pessimistic. And what you're finding out is when these ADs or these coaches talk to some of their peers around the conference, they're finding out that the reality has been a lot harder than maybe they thought, or certainly people on the outside thought it was, to prevent spread. Now, it may be fine at one school, but then you're hearing from other teams in your league where it's not. And so what has happened is they're not even doing football stuff yet, keep in mind. You're talking about small groups and just training sessions. And they're having a hard time managing it. And a lot of that may not be around the facility. It's when, at one school, there was a bunch of kids got together in somebody's dorm or apartment and played Madden, and that led to a little bit of an outbreak. At another school, there was like a pool party. That led to an outbreak. And so when they start hearing these stories, again, they're not even football stuff. When social distancing is harder to manage and everything else, I think that has given them a lot of concern. And what really struck me, not just with what you just had with Gene Smith from Ohio State on, but also the quote that Dave Repson read from Gene Smith on his conference call earlier today, was Gene Smith said a lot of things that I have heard similar from a bunch of ADs that I've talked to in the past week, except now you had somebody putting their name on it. And I felt like there was a lot of substance to that because they're in the middle dealing with reality. And I feel like for a lot of people, you talk to ADs and they'll say, well, one of the problems is a lot of 18 to 22-year-olds and a lot of people in general haven't taken this seriously enough. And I think when you listen and see some of the words that especially Gene Smith has said today, I feel like it was somebody kind of trying to shake people and go, hey, this is not going away. We have to if we want to have a season, some semblance of a season, we got to do better at this.
You know, in that vein, Bruce, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is, you know, there's sort of a common refrain of, well, these are not only young but healthy people, but not everyone is a cornerback or a running back. I mean, the offensive linemen are big guys in football, Bruce, and a lot of the problems, because now it you know, comes in, you know, through the air, but then it goes into your blood, that could have an effect on them in particular as a group.
Well, one of the things I heard from an AD was we don't know a lot about long-term effects either. Now, you could also be a cynic and say, well, you know, reality is there's a lot of long-term risk in playing football to begin with. But one of the points you made, I think, is tied into this as well. You have a lot of staff and assistant coaches who are over 55 plus. Some are not in very good physical condition on top of that. We're not even talking about people necessarily with pre-existing conditions. So I think you're not only talking about the well-being of a lot of people, but you're also talking about the spread of cases and how can you manage it. And again, I think that goes back to a little bit of what we talked about at the beginning, is in terms of testing, in terms of trying to have things as manageable as possible, right? I think right now with what the Big Ten is trying to do, and this is something that I feel like you started to hear more about when you talk to sources around the league in the last week, but it really obviously escalated in the last 24 hours with the Big Ten. And I feel like that's the direction that a lot of people around college football who may not be necessarily in the Big Ten are coming to some of the same realities about what do we do next.
Bruce, quickly before we let you go, what do we still need to know? What do we still need to hear to feel confident that football will start on time?
Well, I think if you're looking, if the Big Ten says, hey, we're going to start on September 5th, do they keep a starting point at the same time? And then how do they manage it with weeks off, potentially for some schedule flexibility if there are cancellations or things of that nature? I think what you're going to hope to see, not just as we get through July, is case numbers go down, if that can be, in a significant way, and people taking this more seriously. I think what you got to be mindful of is once they start getting back into football activity, where it's harder to manage social distancing, where they're not in just small pods of people on a football field, where there's contact and those things, that the cases don't escalate from there. I think, if you're talking about a very small handful of people having positive tests is one thing. If you're talking about getting into the double digits, I think it's going to be a lot harder for people to manage going forward. But again, I think right now, I think they're trying to figure out some contingencies and some protocols in place with at least this model. Because now, like you said, you heard from Kevin Warren today, him actually saying there's a chance we might not have a season this fall, even after the announcement today, I think is a real eye-opener for somebody to put their name on it, to be honest, in a powerful position.
Right, because he wouldn't say it unless it was a real possibility, for sure. Bruce Feldman, thank you very much for the insight.
Thank you, Mike.
Our coverage continuing here on BTN. Again, the decision for no non-conference competition in the fall for the Big Ten, including in football. Urban Meyer going to join us to lend his insights as we continue here on BTN. voluntary on-campus workouts, one of the 7 sports on campus that was impacted due to positive COVID-19 tests. Ohio State saying it's unclear as to when they will resume. We spoke earlier with Gene Smith, the athletic director, again saying he is going to await medical experts' advice before allowing players to continue those workouts. Urban Meyer certainly knows all about those workouts, longtime coach of Ohio State, now an analyst for us at BTN, as well as at Fox, kind enough to join us now. Urban, your reaction, first of all, to the news today that the Big Ten will not play non-conference games this year, not just in football, but in the other fall sports as well.
I think it's the right thing to do. I think it was inevitable. You know, the 2 terms that come up are control and competitive advantage. You know, control over the health and safety, the protocols that I don't think it's all been finalized. I know it hasn't been all finalized yet, but just you can't control your conference. You can't control different parts of the country. And in every country, every state's dealing with their own issue in every conference. So I think as much as I'd love to see the Buckeyes play Oregon and USC play Alabama and the team up north go play Washington, I'd love to see that, but health and safety is number one, and control. And the second thing, Dave, is the competitive advantage. You know, if the Big Ten can control when they start, when they're 2 days, if there is a bump, a speed bump, they can delay things. You can't do that if it's intersectional, conference games, because everyone has their own rules. So as much as like the fans, I think it's the right thing to do.
You know, it's interesting, Coach. I've been around you enough, observed you enough to know that you have everything planned to a T with your team, that you know what you're doing at every point of every practice, of every day in the preseason as you build up to that first game. And now we are dealing with this world of incredible uncertainty where you can plan it, but you better plan it in pencil and have your eraser handy. How does this impact getting a team ready?
Well, Lou Holtz used to always tell me whenever I would ask a question as such, he would say, well, what kind of team do you have? You know, if you have a returning starter like Justin Field, Trevor Lawrence, some of these great players coming back, a veteran team, a system in place, you just got to keep pushing. You got to keep pushing. If you are brand new with a brand new quarterback, and I talk about quarterback because that's the most important position, possibly changing systems where you need spring practice, you need training camp, you're hitting a panic button a little bit. So it depends on what kind of team you got. If you have a veteran team that, you know, got great leadership, you'll actually be strong as anyone in America. If not, you won't. And then the last thing, it depends on those first 3 games, you know, who you're playing. I used to always take a look really closely at the schedule. I wouldn't share this with many people, and I can share it with you now, is if you're facing teams that are far less talented than you actually extend your training camp because it's all about safety of the player. You know, this game is a physical, tough game. And to get guys hurt during training camp when you have 3 weeks of they'll maybe play 25 plays, 30 plays. So there's a lot that goes into it, but the number one conversation is health and safety of a player.
Let's take it away from the competitive part on the field. What are the other challenges inherent in this from a coach's point of view that people might not be aware of?
Oh, the just nutrition. It's amazing the value of a training staff, nutritionist, a sports psychologist, all that goes into a training of an athlete. People think it's gassers and it's a bench press. That's a small percentage of what makes Mickey Marotti, our strength coach at Ohio State, and other great ones I've been around, are not that they're strength trainers. They are people trainers. They, you know, what goes into become an elite athlete, the weightlifting and running are just a portion of what goes on with the mental training, the sport, like I said, a sports psychologist, a nutritionist, the fact that to do what these big guys do, the amount of calories and the things that you have to do to your body to be safe and to have those necessary gains. If people knew the time and effort and resources that went into training a Division I high-level athlete, I'm not sure many people are really aware of that.
Coach, with all the uncertainty here with COVID-19, how would you as a coach be communicating with parents right now, and how important do you believe that is?
I used to have a two-week letter to the parents. I started that when my daughter went to play at Georgia Tech, and I really didn't hear much. And I want to hear. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start making sure there's open dialogue with the families, even if it's via email. And if they didn't respond, I would call them and say, is everything all right? So I think open dialogue with the families are essential. I know Coach Day's done it. I know other coaches have done that quite often. There's nothing more valuable than the child for parents. So I would be probably doing it every week during this time, because if I'm a parent, which my son is actually playing football, I want to know what's going on. And I think open dialogue, transparency of everything is more important than ever right now.
What would you need to see as someone who loves this game, but obviously is concerned about the health and the welfare of the student athletes as well, to convince you that we'd be good to go?
I'm trying to be the eternal optimist here. I still believe we're going to play. It might be a week later. I think conference games gives you a little bit of that control. I think other parts of the country, I would be surprised to see the SEC not go. Other parts are hit harder. So just to listen to the experts, but also not panic and not live your life in fear. So I think you just got to listen to the scientists, listen to team doctors, and when they give you the thumbs up, you're ready to go. The worst possible scenario is they give you the thumbs up and your team's not ready to go. And if something terrible happens, there's another bump and it's just unsafe, then, that was a lot of time and effort that people would say wasted. I wouldn't say it's wasted. Just get your team ready to go and wait for the proper words when it's safe. What do I need to see? I need to hear a doctor who I trust and a group of doctors, experts that say, no, here's the risk, here's what we're doing, and let's go. And the minute they say that, I'm all in. But I don't think coaches can make those. Obviously, coaches can't make those calls.
Right, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that was really interesting to come out of the Big Ten today is this notion that if student athletes aren't comfortable playing, that they can say, I'm not going to play, and retain their scholarship and retain their standing on the team. Those dialogue, it seems to me, would be really important here, Coach, kind of keeping those lines of communication open in a way maybe that is different than in the past. How do you think you'd have to adapt as a coach given these times?
Oh, that's an absolute right thing to do, because there are parents that might say, and that's the other positive, Dave, about not traveling across the country. There are some games, but most of the games are regional, and I hope they kind of take a look at that scheduling-wise. I'm sure they will. But if a parent's not comfortable, then they don't want to play. You don't forfeit your scholarship. Here's going to be the key: is what if they don't play and they say you can all come back and get that year again? You're talking about 25 athletes now, not 2 or 3. So I don't know, man. I just and then this is maybe a conversation for another day. Spring football, having a season in the spring and coming back and playing again in the fall. I can't even wrap my arms around that one. I can't see that happening.
Simply because you believe that it would be too much football in a short period of time?
Well, it's science. It's I've done this. I've been in this game for 30 years, and a player plays 1,000 reps. That player that played returning starter that played 1,000 competitive reps, I was very cautious with him in spring practice. Spring practice was Monday, Wednesday, Friday practice, and a lot of those guys I used to call it the 2,000 rep club. If you went 2 years of starting, I would really back you off. There's no reason to put you in harm's way. You've already earned that right. Your body, you understand the game, and you don't beat players up. So how would you put, a 10-game, say it's a 10-game schedule in the spring, and 5 months later you're in training camp or that? I don't see that one happening.
BTN and Fox analyst Urban Meyer. Coach, thanks so much for your time. Really good to talk to you, even under difficult circumstances.
Great to see you, Dave.
As we continue, we know we won't necessarily see scenes quite like this one this year in Iowa City. But again, the hope is conference games coming up this fall. Jerry DiNardo going to join us to talk that over as we continue our coverage here on BTN. Big Ten announcing no non-conference football. In fact, no non-conference fall sports this coming year. You see some of the significant games that were on the schedule. We already talked to Gene Smith about that big Ohio State-Oregon game, which had Michigan-Washington, Penn State, Virginia Tech. Of course, the Cy-Hawk battle between Iowa State and Iowa. Notre Dame was supposed to play Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. Miami against Michigan State. So some significant ones gone from the Big Ten slate, with the idea of trying to preserve the conference schedule this year and perhaps maybe expand it a little bit as well, as has been speculated over the course of the day, though no confirmation of that at this point. BTN analyst Jerry DiNardo going to join us right now to dive into this a little bit further, joining us on the phone. Coach, thanks so much for your time. First of all, I'm curious as to what you thought when you heard this news. Why do you think this is the direction the Big Ten decided to go in?
Well, the biggest thing is it gives the Big Ten a chance to plan, right? Because now we're self-contained. And now we don't need anyone else's permission. We don't have to worry about contracts with other conferences. And so it gives us a chance to make a decision that all 14 schools will buy into, that nobody else has to buy into. If you were going to make a decision about a certain game or a certain schedule and it was with a non-conference team, obviously you would have to have, their permission. So it gives the Big Ten, the president and the commissioner, total control over a schedule. So the opening games, Indiana, Wisconsin, that can be moved back now because we have flexibility. So I think those are the really important things, that we can plan, we control everything, and we have flexibility. But the planning part and the control of it, it's kind of like wearing a mask, right? You can't go into some stores without a mask. Some stores, it doesn't matter. So we were going to have disagreements with how to proceed with non-conference teams, right? What was the healthiest way to do this and so on. So I think, to me, this puts the student athlete at the least amount of risk, because we can guarantee the student athlete that among the 14 of us, we are going to have best practices. And then the last thing I'll say, to me, the debate about whether we should have a czar in college football, one commissioner of all the leagues, this is a reason why that's not a good idea, because different parts of the country react to different things, different ways. We have different mission statements, different core values. And so college football is a regional sport, and this pandemic has made that clearer maybe than anything else other than the networks that BTN, the SEC network, and so on and so forth have changed the game.
Obviously, we think of you as our studio analyst, but for many years you were a player first in college football and then a coach. Put yourself back in that spot, particularly of being a head coach. And we were just talking with Urban Meyer about this, but I'm interested in your thoughts as well. Assuming you're in that spot where you have to communicate with players about what's going on, what do you think the biggest challenges are for a coach right now?
Well, I think the first thing is you better communicate with the parents. Okay, you went into their homes and you said that you were going to, do the best job you can for their sons and so on and so forth. The women athletes, the same thing. So the first thing I would do, maybe not the first thing, because if I'm with the players, obviously it's quicker to deal with them depending on when this hit. But I'd want to get the parents on the phone. I'd want to have some kind of mechanism to ask the parents what they feel comfortable with our son. I would say to the parents, before we set a team policy that has something to do with health, we are going to run it by you. And if you do not want your son to be part of what we think is a safe environment, we totally understand. I think, it can't be lost that in the commissioner's statement, it said if someone doesn't want to participate, they don't lose their scholarship. I mean, that's a core value for the Big Ten, always has been, always will be. So you have to include the parents. The players, they're pretty resilient. I guess I would just say, hey, guys, this isn't only about you. You have to wear a mask. You have to do the right thing. You're impacting other people. This is another teaching moment, right, that the world doesn't revolve around you. It revolves around all of us.
What are the biggest uncertainties still in your mind here today, Jerry?
Well, you're getting ready for a game and someone tests positive. What do you do? We've got injury reports. We've got the strategy of the game. We can't all of a sudden play the injury report as a strategic advantage. This isn't a quarterback rolled his ankle. Is he going to play? We've got to bring this to the next level. So to me, how are we going to deal with positive tests? Is there a possibility of a postponement? Is there a possibility of a rescheduling? What do we do when we have positive tests in our locker room?
Jerry DiNardo, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, Coach. And as I said to Howard when we spoke to him earlier, I will say the same thing to you. I greatly look forward to the time when you and I can sit around and talk about this together in the same room.
That sounds great, Reverend. Let's hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Absolutely, my friend. Jerry DiNardo, BTN analyst. Pat Fitzgerald, Northwestern head coach, getting set to join us next. We will get some insight into some of those dealings with players and parents from the Wildcat. Coach, that's coming up next. No non-conference football in the Big Ten this season. Conference making that announcement Thursday afternoon. If there is football in the fall, the league says it will only play other Big Ten opponents. That decision, as a matter of fact, applies not just to football, but also to men's and women's cross country and soccer, as well as field hockey and volleyball. Plenty of discussion surrounding this announcement here throughout the Big Ten today. Very pleased to welcome in Pat Fitzgerald, the head football coach at Northwestern, getting set for season number 15 at the helm of the Wildcats. And Fitz, first of all, just curious as to your reaction to this. I assume this did not catch you off guard, but when you initially heard this news earlier than today, what was your thought?
Well, I applaud the Big Ten Conference, Commissioner Warren and the administrators and our presidents, chancellors, and ADs for, really being thoughtful and working with, our doctors throughout the Big Ten Conference and trying to find a way, if it's healthy and safe, to have all of our athletes have the opportunity to compete this year. And, that's been the driving force behind all the discussions. And obviously we as coaches have been asked to engage our student athletes and really share their voices, which I'm very thankful to be able to do that to the conference, and just work to find a way that if we can play the most safe way possible. And this was a step in that direction today.
How has that process worked of listening to the student athletes and then sharing their concerns? Is there a formal way to do that?
Well, I don't know if it's a formal way with the Big Ten. What we did here at Northwestern is, I just reached out to our Unity Council that's, comprised of multiple players from every position, and had them then engage their teammates. And number one, ask that, if it's deemed healthy and safe from our medical experts, would you and are you interested in playing? And then what questions do you and your families have that I can get answered? And so, locally, we were able to then take that to our medical team and have a full Zoom Northwestern football family meeting here the other day, one of many, and more will be coming forward. And then when I was asked my opinion from the conference office, I was not only able to share, my personal thoughts, but then also share the collective thoughts of our players.
Give us a sense for the tenor of what your players have said, Fitz.
Well, number one, I think they understand that everything is being done with the number one priority being the right way that it always is, and that's health and safety. And so those are the protocols that we've all put in place locally. They've been managed and handled by our medical experts. And I think our players feel like the safest environment that they're definitely in is in our facilities. And it's the protocols and procedures that are being followed from the way that you walk into the facility, and the attestations that are being taken, and the testing, onboarding, and the onboarding processes, and the quarantines and isolations if there are positive tests, and contact tracing is cutting edge and the best that they can be a part of. So I think they appreciate that. And I think they all want to play the games that they love if it's healthy, if they're going to be healthy and safe. And so, I just applaud all of our student athletes throughout the Big Ten. I can only imagine how frustrating it is for them. And I know this from everything I've heard, their health, safety, and well-being, not only physically but also mentally, probably even more important or equally as important, is trying to be addressed.
We just had Coach DiNardo on, and he was talking about the importance of communicating with the parents. You mentioned this massive Zoom call that you had with all the families of your players. Do you give yourself an opportunity to communicate simply with the parents without the players present? Kind of how do you balance that out in terms of what everyone feels comfortable saying in front of one another?
Yeah, and then I make sure, we'll do it mostly as a group on Zoom, but then, I've got like the easiest email in the world. I'm not going to share it on BTN and cell number. And all of our families know that they can reach me directly and have a direct line to myself, Jim Phillips, Dr. Jeff, everybody in our football family. So it's full transparency and you just try to be there as much as you possibly can. And then we have a parent group and they have a direct line daily and communication back and forth with our director of player development. So, you try to do the best job you can communicating. I wish we could all say that we do it perfect. It's probably our biggest issue as a society. We can always communicate better and articulate ourselves better, but, just appreciate our families, and I'm sure it's the same for my other 13 brothers here in the Big Ten with their teams.
Fitz, what's your understanding in terms of what's next?
Well, I think that ball is obviously, so to speak, in the doctors and the infectious disease experts and the epidemiologists' court as they monitor, COVID-19 and, obviously have a keen eye on everything that's going on, not only nationally, but then locally in our Big Ten region. And now that we've declared that that's what we're going to do, I think finalizing the policies and procedures, that's all happened to onboard and start workouts with players and for practice. And now the next step is probably finalizing that for game day and travel. And then, making decisions as far as different tiers on who's on the field, who's not, fans, tailgating, all those things, as we get closer. And then ultimately there has to be the medical decision whether or not, we're able to then start to practice and then play. So, we start summer access on Monday. We're having voluntary, and it's going to be voluntary throughout. And if families and young men don't feel comfortable here at Northwestern, I don't know if it's a conference policy yet, but at Northwestern, if they don't feel comfortable, then they don't have to come back to campus, and their scholarship and their benefits are all going to be in place. And, we'll work through whatever we got to work through from eligibility and all that other stuff down the road. But, we want to make sure that we communicate, we listen, and then we act accordingly and fully 100% support our student athletes.
That was part of the conference announcement, by the way, today, Fitz, that is going to be a universal policy throughout the league, that if players don't want to participate, they certainly don't have to. It does not impact eligibility or their financial package at the university either. Interested in what you have heard in terms of scheduling, when you'll know what kind of form this is going to take, the amount of time maybe that it'll take to play these games. In other words, is it 10 games in a certain window? Does the schedule get rearranged based on travel considerations? What do you know about schedule?
Yeah, I would say those discussions are ongoing. I know that the communication within the athletic directors and Commissioner Warren and his staff, the Big Ten, is daily, if not frequently, every day. So I know those discussions are being had. I do appreciate that the conference and the ADs have asked us as coaches for input, and now we'll continue to have dialogue. With us going conference only gives us a lot of flexibility. So we'll look forward to seeing, we already have 9 league games scheduled. Do we stay with that? Do we change the format? I think those decisions will be made as we move forward.
Pat Fitzgerald, head football coach at Northwestern. Fitz, really appreciate you taking a few minutes out to talk with us.
Well, appreciate the time, River, and hope everybody's healthy and safe. Let's do our part. Wear our masks, socially distance, and let's make sure if we want sports, we as a society here in Big Ten country need to look after each other. So everybody stay healthy and safe. Thanks a lot, buddy. Go Cats.
Well said. Thanks a lot. Pat Fitzgerald, Northwestern head coach. Again, a ton of reaction today from throughout Big Ten country to the news that the Big Ten has decided not to play non-conference sporting events this fall, that if there are to be sports in the Big Ten this fall, they will be conference games only. This impacting not just football, but all of fall sports. Thanks so much for joining us here on BTN. Thanks to the many guests who took time out of their day as well. For Mike Hall and everyone here at BTN, I'm Dave Revson. Have a great day.